Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Back to some sort of normality at the moment. It's quite boring really. Anyway, I'm just going to do a quick video on sort of things going on and things to come, that sort of stuff. And I'll end on an orchid that has a story. Those of you that have heard the story can quit out, which is why I'm putting it on the end. But there are going to be a lot of people on the channel that are relatively new that won't have heard the story. So we'll get there in a minute. Right, so things to come. Here, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I can't believe there is a whole rack. I can anticipate, I would imagine that some of the new growths on the Tolumnias are actually going to produce spikes, but that's going to be later in the year. It is highly probable that my one and only bulbophyllum will start producing spikes relatively soon. And the new growths are pushing on, forming their roots and all that sort of stuff. So we might get some spikes on that soon. Tiny little blooms on that, but very attractive. And who knows, we might even get a bloom on this thing one day. This is the Mexicoa. The new growth on the right seems to be pushing on a lot stronger since I added the moss to areas of the roots that had become aerial. So we've got 3 new growths on that. And the plant, I think, is big enough to bloom, so maybe we'll get blooms this time round on the new growths. Can't guarantee it, but you never know. What else? Nothing else around here, really. And around this side, most of this is recovering Cattleyas or Brassavola types. I won't say Brassavola specifically, but that type of orchid that are coming into growth. Some of those growths may produce some spikes farther down the line. And I've just noticed we need to get in here. Why do we need to get in here? That's why we need to get in here. We've got the zygote opening. Not only, this is literally, yesterday these blooms were buds, they were tight, they weren't even showing signs. So we've got this to come, which should be quite a spectacle with the sheer number of blooms. Now there is going to be some staggering, and we've got this little weak spike down here. The buds on there are a similar size to these, so these are going to open within a couple of days. These will follow, then these, and lastly these, and by then these may be going over, but I will be over the moon if all of those spikes are open at the same time. So yeah, zygote to come. That'll be good. Nothing much else going on over here. Nope. My little mounted Phalaenopsis, I'm going to let the spike extend. I don't normally do that. Once an original spike finishes, I normally cut them off because they don't look so elegant with a big long tatty spike with 2 blooms perched on the end. But the blooms are attractive and it wants to extend, so we'll let it this time round. What else have we got? A dead leaf on my Cernua. I was going to say, that would have fallen off a long time ago if it hadn't hooked itself up. Now this is a funny Cattleya type. Was Sophronitis once, now Cattleya. And it rests for a very, very long time. Finishes blooming and then does nothing for literally about 6 months. And then it has a spurt, and it starts normally with some roots, which is the sign that it's coming back into growth. Then it puts out its new growths, and the new growths have the buds inside the leaf. So these leaves start out folded, completely flat, and then they open, revealing the buds inside. So it blooms on the new growths at the time that they open their leaves. So the leaves partially open, revealing the buds, and then the leaves fully open and the buds expand and show us the lovely red blooms. That's a long way off. Things to come. Don't hold your breath with that one, will you? Coming around here, the only thing that's going to happen around here, I think, is this bloom's going to fall off anytime now. Nothing much else to report round here. This Laelia is not happy, but I was told that where it comes from, it has a distinct dry season, and I had some growths rotted off last year, and given the amount of moss around the base of the plant, it was recommended that during its non-growth period I only wet the roots and not the base of the plant, and try and keep it drier until it comes back into growth, and then see what happens then. Well, we've got 2 new growths here and some new roots, so but then we haven't got any new growths around this side of the plant, and that's where all the moss is. So that's, you know, if any new growths come out in that area, they might fail due to the moss. So we'll see how we go with that one. Nothing much else going on around here. My little mounted Masdevallia is actually growing. That's coming on. That's copper wing, that is. It's a long way off getting back up to blooming size. I mean, that was just a couple of leaves that I decided to play with and put on a mount because it didn't seem to want to grow any other way for me. It seems to be okay on the mount. We may be lucky and get a spike on my giant blue Vanda this year. We may do. It's certainly got more light than it's ever had, but I don't see any sign of spikes yet. You just get a little nubbing right down in the leaf crevice, which means you've got a spike coming. Maybe, maybe not. We shall see. I missed it. Where is it hiding? There it is. Is that aborted? No. This little Arengus, which has got the huge big long name, which I can't remember, it's got a spike. Now this is coming back into growth. There's some root activity, various places. This is quite a few plants on this mount. That's how I got it. And I left it on there on the grounds it's on a rock hard piece of something, a wood, bark, something, and it's quite well attached. So I thought, well, you can stay on there, certainly for now. But yeah, we've got a spike on the top of there coming out, so that'd be good. Quite a lot of root activity on here, actually. So growing on, and pretty little blooms to come on that one. This is growing a new leaf and some new roots, and had some moss added because it was just not getting enough hydration. And those few new roots should get down into the moss, then it'll hydrate a bit better. But the roots that it have had a bit of moss added, so we've got a new leaf coming on there. That won't bloom now until next year. That's already done its thing this year, so you may get 2 in a year, but I doubt it somehow. And then up in here, my third Arengus. This is Mr. Sidii, and I don't think this has bloomed for me yet. But there, I love it when this happens. I stand here telling you this hasn't bloomed for me, looking at a spike. Duh, it's not a root, it's a spike. We do have root activity coming on now, and we have a spike. Won't be a very good blooming. This is still quite a small plant compared with the size it can grow. But we have a spike, yay! So, when I started filming, I didn't know that, now I do. Down here, we've got my Harveyanum. That's going to bloom. Very attractive blooms on there. So I'm getting tangled up in canes here. Right, down here, we don't have anything, I don't think. No, we don't have anything going on down here. We've got these blooms to come here. That'll be a first time bloomer. I've forgotten what it's called. Can I read the tag? It's an Encyclia lancifolia. So that'll be a first time bloomer for us to have a look at. That'll be good. This nobly type here has got buds pushing out. This is the one that blooms twice a year, once early in the year and then once in the middle of the summer. And it won't settle down, that just seems to be what it's going to do. So you just let it get on with it. That's what it wants to do. Please yourself and all that sort of stuff. Nothing going on here. Actually, I'm sure one of these has got a spike on it. Well, that one has, even if the others hadn't. So we've got a spike down in there. Oh, we've got a spike here. I was going to say, if one's going to bloom, I suspect they all will. Yeah, spikes all over the place there. So that's going to put on a good show. And now that's the Spectabile Spectabilis hybrid. It's not the true species, it's close, but it has got something else mixed in it. What I think's happened with both of these large Miltonia hybrids is the species was crossed with something and then crossed back with the species again, because it is very close to the species, but it's not pure. And that may have happened with both of them. I mean, the one up the back here, has that got spikes? Yeah, it's got spikes as well. Jolly good. This is the one that has the really large deep purple blooms that looks like Morelliana, but the blooms are bigger than they ought to be and the plant is sturdier than it ought to be, so it isn't the pure species. But that's going mad, this one. This has got new growths all over the place. So the Miltonias, the large Miltonias, of which there are 3, there's this one that won't bloom, and if it tries to I'll stop it, because that was split. And each one of those new growths is a piece with a single back bulb. That's all they are. Potted up in such a way that they can mature those growths, get some decent roots down in the pot, and then next year they'll produce strong new growths, again four at least, and possibly more, and then we'll let it bloom and then it will look good. That's the Regnellii, that one. These larger Miltonias have a habit of producing more than one growth per old spike. Not always, but you can see often there's 2. So they can plump up to quite big plants relatively quickly. The Rhinantheras seem to be doing better since they got put in this mix. There's certainly a lot more root growth than there has been before, both out from the stem. I mean, this one's got roots halfway up the plant now coming out. So they seem to be doing a lot better now that they're getting hydrated for longer periods. They're not drying out as fast in this mix. So they're coming on. And now that the shade netting's up, they're not going to get any worse with the old purple stuff going on up here. It'll be an interesting experiment, because this one over here has a deep purple leaf. This has purple tinges, which are quite deep near the base of the leaf, and then this one didn't suffer from the light. It'll be interesting to see if these ever return to green, or have they gone too far. And we've got several examples of one that's deep purple with no green, and ones that have still got hints of green. Well, one that we don't count because it didn't have any. Right, so that's that lot. Hannah's Phalaenopsis down here. Nearly all of them have come back into growth since they were repotted. They've got new leaves starting, so that's good, and some root activity. The holy clay pots, apart from those that are doing nothing, most have now got new growths coming. Most, I say most, not all. Most have new growths poking through. Yeah, so that they're in growth mode. We won't see any blooms on these for a long time. And down here we've got this nice spike pushing on now. That's on the list to be repotted, but it's been taken from a yes to a no. I'm not repotting it while it's pushing a spike up. I wouldn't mind if the blooms were open and had been open a while, because the energy from the plant has already been expended at that point, but at the moment it needs all the help it can get to develop that spike. My 2 big Sherry babies are showing no signs whatsoever of spikes on the new growth, so lots of green. And I found this morning. That's just opened. That is a Phalaenopsis type, and it's called something like Spring Eclipse or something like that it's called. It was one of those purchases at Burnham's when you've got to walk out with something in a bag. You can't go out empty-handed. Over here, the big Miltoniopsis, the blooms that went to Malvern are going to go over. Don't like the change of environment. Some orchids, they just object to it. What else have we got? Encyclia. Epidendrum, yes, began with E anyway. Epidendrum, Comet Valley Orange Star, I thought was going to finish blooming because I couldn't see any buds. And all the buds have started, so it is going to extend its blooming. But I think they're so far behind. It's had a pause when it's stopped producing buds, and it's dropping blooms. So we might get a period when there's no blooms before those buds have developed, but I suspect there'll still be some. This tiger tail's going over now. Again, another one went to Malvern, bring it back, and the blooms drop. It's too many changes of environment. I mean, it had to be packed up in my car, taken to Alan's, put in his camper van, and stored overnight in there, driven to Malvern, taken out of the camper van into the hall, and then it spends some time there, and then it has to go back into the camper van, back down to Alan's, back into my car, and back here. It's quite an upheaval for plants to put up with all that. And I'm surprised that Miltonia is not suffering even more. But still got a few spikes to come on that. And then over here, my Hercoglossum lost half its blooms at Malvern. So we're now down to what looks like a normal blooming compared with what it once was, when it left here to go there. But I did expect some blooms to drop. But we do still have some buds, so it's going to be in bloom for some time. Because when these buds open, they last 3 weeks. And there's some up here still developing. Yeah? So this is going to be in bloom 4 or 5 weeks from now, even longer. We've got tiny little buds up here. It's going to be in bloom a long time. But it's gone back to its normal sort of thing now, where it blooms in dribs and drabs. Its mass blooming is over now. And the blooms are dropping. Luckily they don't make too much of a mess, given how many they are, because they're so tiny. Still no sign of new growth on this, but then it's still got its blooms. And now we get over to here, the plant with the story. This is Dendrobium Friedrichiana Hannah, CC/RHS, hence the Hannah on the end. And therein lies the story. So if you've heard it, you can wander off now, unless you want to hear it again. I'd probably tell it different every time. This chop up here, the plant fell off of its mount, and the weight of the mount crushed the cane, completely crushed it. So as I brought it out to view, because the blooms are opening, I chopped that off yesterday and put cinnamon on it to seal it off. It's coming into growth at the base, so we do have new growth starting in June. It's just so many things are late in here, so many things. It's just the way we had a cold April, and this grow room doesn't get any sun on it at that time of year. That was a new thing for me. I didn't know how that was going to work. And without the sun, I didn't get the daytime temperatures. So plants still thought it was winter. So they've started into growth and blooming later than usual. And it's a good 3 to 4 weeks late. Anyway, Malvern obviously closed down with the pandemic. So it's some time ago that this plant went to Malvern. And a pure coincidence, that particular year that I took it to Malvern was by far its best ever blooming. Just coincidentally, all the blooms on all the canes, old canes and newer canes, because it can bloom on leafless canes, yeah, and it can bloom on leaved canes. and it just had a mass blooming. And the way it presented itself at that particular point in time, the canes were pendulous, we didn't have any sticking up I don't think, and the new growths were pushing out. So the plant looked good, and so did this. And the Orchid Society they never have, quite honestly. They're not very good with mounted orchids because they're awkward. They've either got to go on a stand, in which case they get in the way of the pots, or they go up the back on the backdrop. And on the backdrop, they're too far away to see properly. So you can't get close enough to appreciate the blooms, let's put it that way. And that's just how shows are, there's not much you can do about it. Anyway, so it was stuck at the back, on the backdrop, hanging from the top, right in the middle. So that's where it was. And it got second best species in show. I've managed to find the copy of the certificate. I can't find the version that I framed. Blowed if I can. That didn't get lost in the move. Anyway, you get a certificate, granted blah 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 to the grower, cultural certificate, and in tiny letters the name of the plant, Dendrobium friedrichianum Hannah. And that was the rosette for second best amateur dendrobium in show, which is, as I said, an international show. That's quite something. I was quite proud of that. Anyway, that was what happened. Now this is an international orchid show. You've seen the video with all the displays, yeah? So second best species in show was quite something. I was over the moon, absolutely over the moon. And then I had a lady from the Orchid Society of Great Britain, who I now know quite well, but I didn't then, came up to me and she said, "You need to put that plant in for judging, Roger." And I said, "It's already been judged, it got a second." No, get it in for RHS judging. And that frightened the life out of me. And basically another friend that I knew quite well at the time, who's now gone to Italy, so that was Zaina, she was also part of OSGB. She said, "Yeah, you need to get that plant in, Roger. That's too good to miss an opportunity to get it under the RHS judges' noses, because they don't come together for that function very often." So I said, "Yeah, well, that's all very well, but I don't know how to do it." "Don't worry about that, we'll get you some help." I said, "And the other thing is, how the hell do you think you're going to get that plant down?" One of the ladies that was there, she said, "We'll soon sort that out." Flipped her shoes off and climbed all over the Orchid Society's display to get up the back and get my plant down. I just looked away. I thought, I'm not having anything to do with this. Anyway, the plant was got down, and good friend Glenn from the Orchid Society, he's a judge anyway, he said, "Come on, I'll help you fill the form in." I said, "Where have we got to go?" He said, "The tent's next door." It's not far, which was good because the weather was crap that year. So anyway, we went in there, and it's all very formal. I mean, professional photographer there with the screens and the diffusers and a camera about as big as a house. To take your picture to go in their magazine, and everything, and it's all a bit formal. Anyway, you fill the form in, species, dendrobium, that sort of thing, friedrichianum, and then there's another column, name. And I looked at Glenn and I said, "What the hell do I put in here?" He said, "You make up a name and it becomes unique to that plant. This is your chance to name your plant." I said, "I don't know what to do." And he said, "Well, what about your daughter, Hannah?" So that's how this became Dendrobium friedrichianum Hannah, in little quotes. Yeah, that's how it became. It got awarded cultural commendation, which is, it's an award for the grower, really, not the plant, but the plant has to be good enough to get the award for the grower, if you see what I mean. So This is the only one in the world that can be called that. And the only others that can be called that would be divisions off of it, or if any were produced from seed, which that ain't going to happen. One day I might divide it and let somebody else have a piece, but at the moment I'm bringing it back. It had to have a remount, set it back, which is why its new growths are late as well as the season, and I trimmed off loads and loads of tatty old canes as well to tidy it up a bit and, you know, put its strength into the new stuff. So anyway, that's the story of how this one got its name. And to say I was over the moon, you should have seen Anna's face. You get a huge certificate. I don't know where the hell it is, because I framed it, but since I've moved I'm not quite sure where it is. I just can't think where the hell I put that. Anyway, you know, you get a lovely certificate, and your plant gets gets put in their magazine. So I was well pleased, and these are lovely flowers. This is a bloom that has quite a bit of variety. The species can be very pale yellow, it can be deeper yellow, it can have a very deep centre in the middle of the lip, and others don't, and some of them have got little red blotches in the lip, and some of them haven't. So it's very variable. And then the sepals have that very pale stripe showing through. So they're attractive blooms, and you know, when this was in its heyday, that particular year, it was absolutely stunning. And yeah, I mean, I'm pleased that it's coming back. We've got new growths, they'll push on now. And this is another one of those where the new growths can push on through the winter if the temperatures stay mild and the daytime temperatures are better than the nighttime temperatures. And sometimes that can happen right on into December, which means the canes will get to potentially their full length, like this one. Yeah, so I mean, that one starts up here and comes right down to here. And unfortunately the blooms are facing the window. But yeah, it's tough. It's in here the light does funny things to the plant, so I'm having to get used to that. So that's the story of how that one got its name. And the chances of me having another plant good enough and in full bloom at its absolute best to go in front of RHS judges ever again is zero. It's just never going to happen. The only two shows where RHS judging goes on that I can get to any sense is the Wisley one, which used to be in central London. That used to be called the London Orchid Show, the RHS London Orchid Show. That's been moved from central London to Wisley. There's a video of that. There's RHS judging goes on there. And then Malvern. The other few times that would happen, they're places that I can't get to. They're just too far to travel to. So they won't happen. There's only those two shows. So, and the chances of me having a plant good enough, specimen sized and in full bloom to coincide with that are practically zero, as I said. Most of my dendrobiums that could possibly come into that category, they're either not open yet for Wisley, or they're not open for Malvern. This is the only one I've got that genuinely flowers in June. It's a midsummer bloomer. This one, although it's in bloom now, it would normally be almost finished by June. It starts in April normally, on through May, and finishes during June. It's just late this year. So anyway, that's where we are. And I've got a bit of watering to do today. I've got to mix up some feed because I've been a bit lazy recently because of things going on, and the mounts have been sprayed, but they've only had water. So they haven't had any feed for a while yet, so I'm going to knock up some feed today. They're still going to get sprayed. I'm not taking them all down and watering them. So they're still going to get a spray. And then tomorrow I will probably go through the pots. And again, they've been topped up with the sprayer quite frequently. And I just worry when I do that some plants are getting too wet, because you keep topping them up without looking to see how wet the media is. especially as a lot of them are in black pots as shields for the algae. So I need to have a go through the pots to check what's going on. And again, they can have a light feed as well. Actually, they need a medium feed. There's quite a few are growing at the moment. So anyway, there we go. A look round at some things to come, some things that already are, and some expectations of things down the line. But there's quite a few. I mean, an awful lot of my Oncidium types are autumn into winter bloomers. So there's not going to be much out along, in that department. So that includes, the Miltoniopsis, apart from that hybrid. That's the Miltonias, the Oncidium types themselves, the Tolumnias. They're going to be in bloom later in the year, much later in the year. So we'll have to wait for those. And Cattleyas, as I said, most of my Cattleyas are in a state of recovery in some shape or form. They are showing good signs of recovery now, but they've got to get their strength back. They've got to get decent root systems, having lost most of the ones they had. So we've got to get them going again. And they're showing signs of playing ball. There's still a couple that might not make it, but most are at least trying. That's the way I look at it. They always get credit for trying, even if they don't make it. Right, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by. Let's have a last look at this. Lovely blooms. Got two squashed up against the glass up there. And as I said, this next lot are all going to be facing the window, so I might have to turn the mount round the other way or try and find somewhere else to hang it or something. We'll work something out. But it's going to be a bit of both, because I mean, these are facing this way, most of those are facing that way, these are facing this way, so a bit all over the place. But, that was the other thing when that was in bloom for that RHS judging session. All the blooms were facing the same way because it had had its back to darkness and its face to light, so all of the buds had pushed towards the light. So it did look pretty good that year. So anyway, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.